folks suburbanizing to that great mecca of North Arlington, New Jersey. Exit 15W on the turnpike. You know the smell. Right next to the Meadowlands Arena, where I grew up, Sopranos. Right between the great Pizzaland Pizzeria and the Bar Club. We grew up talking like this. This is a great city you have here in New York. It's a crazy place. Right there, I could see over the course of my life the economy begin to pivot. I watched Newark burst into flames. I watched the factory where my dad worked shutter. I watched the manufacturing jobs that supported our entire community move to the Sun Belt, to the south, to the east, and to China, the world's factory. But our economy didn't collapse. In ways that Rosemary and our colleague Mitchell Moss and others have talked about, our economy began to change. And for the first, and that's what the financial crisis and economic crisis really represents. It is the pivot point from an old physical economy to a new economy based on the human brain, on intellectual capital. What I call the knowledge or the creative economy, where the mind itself has become the means of production. All things that were quite controversial when I wrote about them 15 years ago, which are now seen as commonplace. But the pivot point of our economy is no longer manufacturing. In fact, in New York, the great metro area of New York, less than 16% of our workforce toil in blue-collar jobs. And that's construction, transport, maintenance, and factory work. Less than 5% of us work in jobs like my dad did in a factory in direct production. Whereas more than 50% of Americans worked in agriculture a century ago, whereas more than half of Americans worked in or around industry in the 1950s and 1960s. Today, the majority of us, the real value creators, the people that are spurring the renaissance of New York and Boston and Washington and San Francisco and throughout those great college towns throughout the heartland, are part of the new knowledge-based economy. They're engaged in science and engineering, technology, entrepreneurship, research, arts, design, media, and management. I call them the creative class. In the United States, they now number 50 million workers, a third of the workforce. In New York, it's 1.5 million workers. They are the economic generators of our time, and they are the force that is generating the transformation of our cities. The transformation and renaissance in our cities, the things that are happening in real estate aren't epiphenomenal. They're not just because people like cities better. They're not simply because cities have something more to offer. They're not only that cities have become less dangerous. They're a product of this fundamental economic revolution where creativity is the cornerstone and source of all economic growth. And understand, I didn't create this theory from trying to understand where yuppies move, where young people move, where trendy people move, or artists move. I came up with this theory by studying the best factories in the world. When I went to Japan in the 1980s and studied the Japanese factory, the person who ran the steel producing line outside of Nagoya showed me a completely automated and robotized method of making steel coil, which I had never seen before. I said, what laboratory was that invented in? What scientific research and development center created that? He said, that was created right here on the factory floor. The factory itself is the laboratory. The workers are the source of innovation. I heard it from my dad. As a young boy, I wanted to go visit my dad's factory. I wanted to see where he worked. He told me, Rich, your job is to stay in school and get an education. I work in the factory so you don't have to. But on Saturday, when that factory was firing on overtime, my dad would take me to visit that giant brick structure. And as you approach Newark Airport, you can still see it today. In the iron bound section, we'd enter that factory, and I would see the machines whirring, making eyeglass rings quite like these. My dad would see me looking at the machines, and he said to me, Rich, it's not the machines that make this factory great. It's the knowledge, it's the intelligence, it's the creativity of the people who work here. You see, it's not our physical labor that drives the economy. It's never been natural.